A misty night has fallen over Stone Ridge, the village at the narrowing end of a fjord, built in several layers, partly above land, partly above water, on stilts. These ramshackle houses of about 150 people, where Bastion, one of them, has taken in Kynan for the night, with the intention of embarking on a trading journey the next morning, where Kynan should act as some sort of caravan guard. It's a quiet night, everyone's asleep, and Kynan is in a hammock between two supporting beams inside of Bastion's house. He's far from alone. There's Bastion, his wife, several children, 5 of them all sleeping. But Kynan isn't sleeping. He's taking advantage of the quiet night and listening. Whether there's something to listen to, we'll find out now. Hey everyone, how are you? This is Kill 10 Rats. I'm Anderson and we continue on Kynan's journey in the village of Stone Ridge, and we have some pursuers to quiz the Oracle about. As you may remember, Kynan has dispatched with 2 salvagers some time ago, right after he got shipwrecked on the southern shores. And as a complication to missing our inciting incident vow, the band that these 2 ran with, these salvagers, have picked up the trail, and my question is, are they gonna attack us during the night? Now, before I ask that question, I have to make one correction. I have to give us one more momentum, because we did strong hit the reach our destination result when our journey came to an end and reaching Stone Ridge, meeting Bastion. And on a strong hit, we get the choice of either making another move with a +1, which wasn't really appropriate, so we take +1 momentum, which we do right now. But more importantly, are the pursuers that we have acquired going to attack the village at night as revenge for their fallen comrades? I think I'm giving this a solid 50-50 chance. They might attack now, or they might be biding their time and be pursuing this trading expedition in the morning instead. Perhaps they want to watch some more, or perhaps they've already made up their minds and they start to take advantage of everyone bedding down tonight and attack now. We'll see. 50-50, 51 and upwards, they attack. 58, they attack! I think at this point I would like to know a bit more about the raiders themselves. We already determined that they are a desperate lot. We found a deserter among them. They weren't the strongest, but perhaps they're not all like that. I'm sort of picturing this band where those 2 weakest pulled the guard duty during the night because they're not very desirable, and perhaps the stronger warriors that are among them were just asleep. So we're assuming that they are with them now. We need to figure out who the leader is, but I think overall we will have quite a force to contend with here. What I'd like to know is who's leading them. So first question, of course, is, are they human? I determined that's pretty likely, and we rolled a 61, so we definitely land in likely territory. Now let's flesh them out a bit to give us some idea how they would approach this. Not that Kynan knows any of these things, nor probably does Bastion. They will have come in conflict with the fringes of this band every now and again, and perhaps even been raided by them, but who knows whether they've even ever laid eyes on this leader. So let's start off with the name. We're going for an Ironlander name, and we're getting a 54. That leaves us with the choices of Saskia or Talon. I think Saskia, first choice. We have a female antagonist here who needs a few characteristics, so let's give him some. Perhaps we start out with a character goal to understand why Saskia is doing this. Greed is a likely sentiment, but these are outcasts, so Saskia might just be leading this band out of necessity and have some ulterior motive. We'll figure it out. We have a 63, which is enrich themselves. Well, that is very, very fitting. Thank you, Ironsworn. You are on point as usual. Now, what is Saskia like? Perhaps this can give us an idea about what her plans are and how she's going to approach this ambush or attack, or, well, it's not really an ambush. It's not like they're lying out there in the villages walking into them. But it's a nighttime attack, so they're, surprise attacking us. So Saskia, you are 84. Determined, that is likely, yeah. Hard to get to be the leader of a band like this without being somewhat determined. And you are 48. 84 and 48, that's an interesting one. Wild, ooh, okay. That is, interesting. So Saskia is a wild one. That sounds like the attack will be somewhat reckless or maybe savage. Reckless almost seems like a bit of a boring choice. Reckless would be rushing and screaming, I'd suppose, and they don't really have much of a reason to do that other than their leader being a wild one. Whereas a savagery would indicate that they just don't really have any holes that bar them from going after this village itself just to get to one man. I think that makes more sense as an interpretation for wild. So this determination and wildness expresses itself in the motivation for the attack. They don't care how much collateral damage they cause just to get to the one that struck down two of theirs. Now let's picture the village layout for a second. It's more like a horseshoe shape on the narrowing water, where water meets land, as the cleft formed by the fjord slowly elevates and turns into more of a hillside that goes up to the high ground, and there is a first layer on stilts connected by walkways where some of these houses are and the boats are moored, and a second layer already on land, and a third layer above this, perhaps with like a main hall, gathering hall, where the village congregates. So if they wanted to attack from both sides, they'd have to cross over before they reach the village, or like walk through the village, which is kind of unlikely. I think they are posting sentries in the night. Let's find out. I think that's a very likely scenario. Yeah, they're posting sentries, so we have some watchers probably on each side of the entry points to the village, where the walkways meet the beach and where they put up these racks of fish just to keep an eye on them, mainly also to drive off some stray animals and such. I think we don't need to determine at this point whether or not they are attacking from both sides. We can introduce this as a complication depending on how the die rolls go for us. But what we do find most likely is, of course, that the entry point that they choose for their initial attack is the path that Kynan and Bastion also took into the village, that beach path on the side that Kynan walked in from. So now we know that an attack is imminent and Kynan is listening for it. He has also determined it extremely likely that the pursuers that he saw that made him pick up the pace and find this shelter in this village are going to come for him. And as we've determined in previous episodes and in building Kynan's background, he's not the nicest person, so there is a decent likelihood that he does want to avoid a confrontation here, because he's no hero. And given circumstances, I think he's perfectly willing and capable of just sacrificing this entire village to cover his own retreat and sneak out without anyone really being aware. That's partly why he stayed awake. And thus, in the fiction, he very carefully tips out of his hammock. One leg first, setting it down lightly, then the other, already having strategically placed his pack that he acquired for the journey tomorrow nearby, reaching for it, shouldering it, grabbing that sword that he picked off Finner and just holding it in hand for now, trying to avoid any clatter, trying to avoid any noise. He's packed this backpack of his in the same way. He's very used to being an infiltrator. He stacks everything in there and buffers it so it doesn't rattle or make noise. He is back to being armed and armored. He's wearing his leather coat, his reinforced leather coat, and having been resupplied by these kind people here, he is also quite well stocked, so he's prepared to undertake another journey far away from this place. Given the circumstances, I don't think we need to roll for any infiltration, exfiltration maneuvers here. The family is asleep, the guards are relatively far away, so he's creeping towards the door and slowly pulling it open bit by bit, having studied it also the night before to see whether it makes any creaking noise and how to probably prevent this. And as he's pulled it open just far enough to slip out, like push his backpack out first and slip out after, a voice like a whip rings out and shoots down his spine and makes him freeze up and seize up immediately. "Oh, you are not doing this, my friend." This is where Spiritbound comes into play, because Kynan is haunted by a fallen companion of his, Siora, whose death he caused, partly, by not rescuing her even though he had the chance, abandoning her to her death. And while this provides some distinct mechanical advantages, it also provides a nice deus ex machina for us to give Kynan a bit of a push into a more heroic direction. So Siora is not having this. She is very, very much determined that Kynan is not going to creep out and leave these people to a fate that he brought upon them. And she is also perfectly able to make his life a bit uncomfortable. The way I imagine his haunting is it's partly a manifestation in your head. You can hear the voice, but you can also feel the impact of the spirit around you in a way that they just are able to send some shivers down your spine and make you have certain uncomfortable reactions. So all of a sudden Kynan finds himself stuck. He's got one hand on the door still, and the voice of Siora ringing in his ears, and looks around whether this was actually a physical manifestation of the voice and whether she actually just woke everybody up. But the gentle snoring behind him does give credence to the suspicion that this was all something only he could hear. Now at this point, with his head partly out of the door and partly still in the room, he hears that telltale sound of somebody being quietly but not soundlessly taken out, as one of the guards down the pathway on the side that Kynan is on currently, giving off a strangled cough and that rustling sound of somebody dropping to the floor. And now it's executive decision time. Is Kynan gonna run or is he gonna stay? With the view of what Siora is likely to do to him, because she's also pretty determined and wild, he gives in. And he churns back, bounds over to the bed that Bastion is sleeping on, shakes him awake. What is it? And in hushed, hissed tones, he quickly informs him that raiders are coming. Now let me quickly consider what Kynan is planning. I think what he would like to do is to get an overview of what the enemy force is like, where they're coming from. He's already determined that they're coming at least partly down the way that he also came into the village, so he knows that territory a little bit. And I think what he's most comfortable doing is getting the high ground, getting an overview, and then picking off enemies from afar with a bow. The problem is he doesn't have a bow. The question is, does Bastion have a bow? And are we gonna grab it? So let's think about this. I think Bastion, while he's also a fisherman, is very likely to be a hunter as well, given that the territory up above the fjord is at least likely to have some game on it. Let's give it a 50-50. 51 above, we got a bow. 75, we got a bow within reach that Kynan's probably been eyeing for quite a while. So as he twists around again, he grabs it, grabs the quiver, puts it over his shoulder. And before he leaves Bastion's side, he hisses to him, "Once you hear 3 short, sharp whistles, raise the alarm." And without a further word, he turns away, ignores the backpack by the door, slips out, and tries to get up top of Bastion's house. I think what we're going to do is we're going to treat this as secure an advantage using shadow to understand whether the enemies are already close enough to spot us here, or whether we get the chance to secure a position where we can spot them first and also enter the fray out of an ambush position. This kind of negates the advantage we could get from Archer, which is also a secure an advantage move, but in the end, the aiming to me right now is outweighed by the element of surprise. So we can aim and use Archer as soon as we're directly engaged. I think at the moment we're gonna use secure an advantage using shadow. So let's do it. Oh yeah, we have a strong hit here. So we go round the side of the house where Bastian has hung up a strong knotted net to dry, which Kynan uses as a handhold to help him up on that ramshackle shingled roof. As he pulls himself up there silently and creeps towards the edge of the roof, that gives him a nice semicircular view of that area in front of him, where the other half of the town is covered in mist and darkness. He can't see quite that far, but he's got enough vision to see some silhouettes creeping towards the walkway where the houses start. Now, what I'd like to understand is this a scouting force, or is this already the main party? I think it's likely that they are attacking right away and that they're not sending just a handful of people to scout ahead, but let's see. So it's likely that they attack with full force immediately. Where do we stand on this oracle? 8. They don't attack with full force immediately. So the way I interpret this is that perhaps the majority of their force isn't very sneaky, which makes me think perhaps they're more armored, and the ones that are coming towards us now, the scouting ones, are the handful of sneaky former burglars, pickpockets, thieves, to whatever extent this exists in the settlements of the Ironlands, probably why they were cast out, and then sending them ahead to take out that lone guard on this side that is making sure that the seagulls aren't eating all the fish during the night. So let's turn this into a separate combat encounter against a dangerous foe, which would tell me that we have maybe 2 troublesome foes sneaking in a little bit farther to signal that the coast is clear as soon as they got a decent overview of whether there's someone farther into the village, still also guarding the night watch. So we make a progress track of 2 raider scouts, dangerous enemies, and we have secured an advantage successfully, which gives us the option to make a move right away again. And in this case, with Kynan and a bow in his hand and some arrows, I think it's very obvious what he's gonna do. Kynan is perched up top on the roof in the dark, his outline pretty much obscured by the absence of direct light. Having a fairly decent view of the outlines of the 2 scouts creeping up against the water. And in quick succession from ambush, he plans to shoot 2 arrows, try and strike them down quickly, hopefully soundlessly, and stall out the oncoming attack, giving the villagers more time to ready themselves as soon as he gives the alarm signal to Bastian. So let's enter the fray. Strong hit. We have a 3, we have the advantage from security advantage, and we have 4 shadow, so we strong hit the enter the fray move, which gives us 2 additional momentum, or we take the initiative, I think. No, that's a weak hit. We do take 2 additional momentum, and we have the initiative, so we can strike right now, and that's a decent amount of momentum at this point. So let the first arrow fly. That's a roll plus edge. Edge is 3, and we will see how that goes. It goes decently enough. We have a weak hit, but that also makes it very unlikely that we do this soundlessly, because then we lose the initiative, but we can do our harm. We're armed, we're against dangerous foes, we have inflicted 2 harm, that gives us 4 progress in total, 4 fully filled progress boxes. I'll mark that down quickly. And I think the way this goes is that Kynan loses 2 arrows in quick succession. 1 strikes home into the neck of the first scout, who unfortunately stumbles back and inadvertently pushes the other scout out of the way of the second arrow that would have struck home, but just shoots past his head and gives him the opportunity to cry out in surprise and then cry out in alarm, which in this case also prompts Kynan to give his 3 short, sharp whistles, at which point all hell is going to break loose. Now we've lost the initiative, so it's our scout's turn to act. He's quite far away. He's not immediately aware of who attacked him. So let's ask the Oracle what the scout is going to do. This is the combat action Oracle, and we get a use the terrain to gain advantage. So the scout is going to get out of the line of fire, understanding where the shot came from out of the village, jumps in the water. So we have our scout toppling backwards off the gangway into the water, shallow as it may be, but still enough to prevent a lethal fall and not injuring himself. Just hearing that dull sound of the body going into the water as cries go up in Bastian's house and down the beach, where the forces of Saskia understand that they've been spotted and their battle cries ring out as they rush for the village. I think we count the scout toppling in the water and disappearing from sight as them ending the combat encounter, because Kynan has no chance anymore of resolving this combat encounter. So we're gonna scrap this progress track and focus on what happens next. I'm thinking now from Saskia's perspective and from the perspective of Kynan having lost the initiative for the moment that I would like to carry over. What would she have done to account for this situation? I think what might happen and what might force Kynan to abandon his position is that out of the night air, with the cries ringing up in the village and the first doors flying open and the first silhouettes appearing out of the mist towards the ramps up into the village, the hiss of arrows is, faint as it may be, still a sound that Kynan is very much familiar with and that catches his attention. And so he looks up and sees little points of light coming towards him, realizing that Saskia has readied a volley of flaming arrows to rain down in front of the onrushing force to secure a little bit of chaos as things go up in flames, ideally, and to provide a rolling barrage kind of protection. So Kynan has to face danger to see whether we're able to get off that roof before some arrows strike down and make life uncomfortable. This is very likely going to be a face danger move with edge, where we react with speed and agility to get out of the way off the roof, rolling forward and trying to land in a way not to shatter our kneecap. So let's see how it goes. That is a weak hit. And I think given the option of spraining our ankle and losing health, or just reflecting the fact that we just gave up a very appropriate position for raining hell on the approaching raiders, we should reflect this by taking 1 momentum down. So we're down to +6 momentum at this point, and we are off the roof on the walkway between a rock and a hard place, really, because we can escape between the houses. We have the onrushing foes quite a distance away yet, and we have the first villagers coming out of the houses behind us, and 1 or 2 also in the houses in front of us. And I think what we're also seeing is some small fires erupting on edges of roofs and on pillars of the walkways, where the weather-beaten, dried-out wood just catches on fire, not like a tinderbox, but there is some smoldering, some flames licking up, and this will need attention. So perhaps this could be a scene challenge for us, where we need to resolve this battle before the scene challenge runs out. Otherwise, we have a problem of part of the village being on fire while the battle then reaches its climax. I think that sounds like a pretty good and interesting challenge to build here. So a scene challenge, the way it works, if I remember this correctly, let me just quickly read up on this. So the way this works, this is a standard dangerous progress track, which in this case dangerous I think is appropriate. We have a fairly evenly matched and positioned distribution of forces here. The villagers are alarmed, the onslaught hasn't hit the village yet, so there is a even footing at the moment. And with Kynan now almost inadvertently being on the front lines, he's got the option and the possibility to coordinate that flank of the incoming attack. Perhaps there's another flank, we don't know. And we do this by facing danger and securing an advantage depending on how we coordinate the forces and how we make moves. Why should they listen to Kynan? Considering these are fishermen first and foremost, and they just got out of bed and are probably a little bit woozy and stumbling out of their house to the call of alarm, having grabbed whatever weapon they could find, seeing a heavily armed and armored, wide awake stranger who is already engaged in battle and clearly knows what they're doing, lends a certain authority, I think. So, scene challenge. We coordinate the battle on our flank, perhaps the only flank. 10 progress boxes. The hits on the face danger and secure advantage moves that we make with our forces give us progress. And the misses fill a 4-box progress track that as soon as it's full, the opposing force has manifested. So houses are wildly on fire, and it's our goal here to push back the opposing force so the villagers moving up get a chance to put out the fires. That's, I think, my interpretation of how this scene challenge agenda is. So the attackers want to prevent us from putting out the fire so they can cause havoc and generally be wild and savage, while we're trying to push them back so we can save the village. And since we do not have the initiative at the moment, we are going to face danger first and foremost, which means that as the first couple of villagers armed with billhooks and clubs and hand axes come out of the doors of the houses between Kynan and the onrushing enemies, he shouts at them, "Pull back, form up!" So we're trying to get them to understand where the danger is coming from, to pull back, to form an orderly blocking funnel to not let the onrushers push us back, which I think is a command action almost similar to a compel move. We use hard, but we use it as face danger. So let's see how that goes. It's not Kynan's strong suit. That's still a weak hit, which, let me see how to interpret this. So in a weak hit, if we face danger as our move, which in this case we did, we also lose 1 progress on the countdown. So we now are at 1 out of 4 boxes filled, but we also mark progress on the progress track. For a dangerous challenge in this case, that means we mark 2 progress, and we will see what the next move could be. I think Kynan takes muster, sees that he has about 3 villagers near him, a 4th running up, joining in, looks around, sees Bastion off somewhere in the distance with a bunch of other villagers forming, coming towards. And while he understands that the fire is going to be a problem, he also doesn't really consider that the current force that he has is strong enough to meet the onrushing enemy, which I think is probably more than like several ranks of combatants coming towards his own force. So his sneaky nature takes over and he hisses at the other 4 at this point. "Fall back with me. Once we reach the others, go between the houses and circle back forward. Hit them in the side. Bastion and his men will go for the front." So the idea that Kynan has clearly is to engage frontally, and as soon as the engagement is hit, this 4-person group circles around the 2 houses on the side, on the hind walkways, and through the narrow between the 2 front-facing houses to hit the side of the rows of oncoming enemies that don't have that much room to navigate there. There's about 3-4 people wide, this large central walkway, and he hopes that the joining of the forces while he falls back to Bastion obscures this splitting off group that goes around the side. So let's face danger again and see how that goes. In this case, since we are being deceptive and sneaky, we can harness our shadow quality and use the firing off a few arrows in the direction of the enemy to slow down the progress, give them something to think about, as Kynan and his 4 compatriots fall back. And we get a strong hit. That is a nice one. Which means we take 1 momentum, we mark 2 progress, and we do not in fact lose any countdown progress here, or rather gain any countdown progress to our disadvantage. What I'd like to know is whether Saskia is in this group. I think it's likely, but not guaranteed. She isn't. Okay. So there is another group somewhere. We'll have to figure out what that means, but for now let's focus on the onrushing one. We have just faced danger. We are meeting up with Bastion and his forces while the onrushing enemies are throwing weapons and firing arrows, and there's another volley of arrow coming in to set more fires, which I think represents the countdown track that we lost in the previous roll. As one of the men in Bastion's group goes down with a throwing axe in his chest, Kynan waves to him. I sent some round to hit the flank. We need to meet them at the front to cover them. And Bastion just nods grimly and readies his hand axe and shouts a battle cry as he rushes past Kynan, who, a little bit caught off guard by the spirited enthusiasm of his new companion. I think in this case rips out the sword that he took from Finner and goes side by side with Bastion. I don't think he has that little honor in the heat of the moment. Once he's committed to the fight, he's fighting. Which makes this, for me, a secure and advantage iron challenge, or maybe it's a face danger. It's more like a clash, really, so I think, yeah, we don't really have an advantage to push. We're creating a distraction that's dangerous for us by meeting them head on, which is extremely predictable. So yeah, we're facing danger, but we're using iron. So let's see how that goes. That is a weak hit, I do believe. Or is it? It's, yes, it's a weak hit. We have another track on the countdown and 2 more on the progress. So it's getting a bit dicey. Perhaps Saskia is with the group at the back, directing the arrows, but I don't think that works very well. So I think it's almost more likely that there is a second flank open up somewhere that we haven't seen yet and we can't really hear because there is a clamor going on of many voices shouting and the arrows raining down and men bashing their shields and women bashing their shields. I think in this case we endure harm and lose 1 point of health as an arrow just slams into the armor plate on Kynan's leather coat and causes not really a wound, just a hematoma and some subcutaneous muscle damage. And the countdown being represented that there's more fire arrows coming in. So we're now engaged at the front, and I think the next move is going to be a secure and advantage with iron as our branched off party hits them in the flank from between the frontal 2 houses. And it's another weak hit. So what does that leave us with? We take 1 momentum, and as for the scene challenge, we do not mark countdown and we actually have more progress here. So in the fiction, Kynan and Bastion and 2 others side by side and with some more behind them, some perhaps with longer weapons and bill hooks, just also fighting above their shoulders and in between, clash into the frontal rank of the oncoming raiders. Kynan doesn't really notice the wound at this point. He just swings the sword, rather like stabs the sword forward and cuts down one. Bastion similarly dispatches of a foe. One of the fishermen gets caught and drops to his knees. Another one pulls him back, steps into the gap from behind and just holds off the enemy as the other fisherman is lying down and not sounding so good. And as the other force crashes into the side, the damage is pretty spectacular. So the onrushers weren't necessarily prepared in their savagery for any kind of deception from these fishermen, and the 4 that come in pairs jumping out from the gaps between the houses cut down several, form like a rift between the 2 groups now that are rushing on and effectively cutting off a group that were Instinctively, some of the men turn around, now wedged in between two opposing forces, getting cut down immediately. We can try to resolve the scene challenge here, I think, because we have 8 progress. That's 2 8s. Oh god. Okay, so we don't succeed, and we also roll a match. Ooh, juicy. So what does that tell me? This battle is going well, relatively speaking. We've just struck decisively, but perhaps it was all meaningless because the real show was happening somewhere else, where Saskia was. What could that be? We shall ask the Oracle. I think we're gonna ask the plot twist Oracle for a change, because this is warranted. We have a highly successful fight on our hands here. We have failed to resolve it, and we roll a match, which is disastrous consequences. And we're rolling the major plot twist instead of rolling on the pay the price table, because in the end that is recommended as a substitute, and we can assume that there is some kind of plot twist happening here. So what is going on? 0-2. It was all a diversion. Okay, it was all a diversion. So the force attacking here was not the main force, even though there's a lot of them. So there was a lot of raiders. Well, a few less now. The melee raging at the edge of Stone Ridge is going in Bastion and Kynan's favor. The enemies between the two parts of their force are quickly cut down, and forces are joined to push the remaining onrushing force now on its back foot further out the village, with a view of being able to take care of these flames, getting first and foremost also at these archers that are somewhere lined up in the back and still firing overhead, as the bell that is hung to the meeting hall of Stone Ridge that calls the village together is rung, clanging loudly, signaling danger, danger, and that in and of itself is not very unusual, except that it's joined by a dull the sound of a horn that Bastion knows does not belong to one of the villagers that he's heard in the distance before or during previous raids, that he very much associates with Saskia, the leader of this band of raiders, and it's coming from the direction of the village hall. And just as Kynan is about to rush forward into the fray, looking for these archers and driving back these onrushing or now retreating attackers, he feels a hand on his shoulder, and it's Bastion whirling him around, simply going, "Look!" And Kynan turns his head and he sees there is fire in the back of the village. The village hall is lit up, and since its roof is made of dried reeds, it just goes up like a bonfire, signaling that there is something there. And Bastion, his eyes wide, says, "I sent the women and children in that direction." And we have a problem. So let's find out how it goes next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.